Marcus Rivera pressed his back against the cold concrete wall of the abandoned warehouse, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. The sound of shuffling feet and low moans echoed through the empty streets beyond the barricaded doors. 3 months had passed since the outbreak began, and their group of 47 survivors had dwindled to just 12. The warehouse that once seemed like salvation now felt more like a tomb. "We're running out of options," whispered Elena Thompson, the former nurse who had become their unofficial medic. Her hands shook as she checked the bandage on young Timothy's arm, where a piece of debris had torn through his jacket during their last supply run. "The antibiotics are almost gone, and without proper medical supplies, even minor injuries could become fatal." Marcus nodded grimly, his weathered face showing the strain of leadership that had been thrust upon him when their original leader, a retired military officer named Colonel Hayes, had been lost during a rescue mission 2 weeks prior. The weight of 12 lives pressed heavily on his shoulders, each decision potentially meaning the difference between survival and becoming part of the mindless horde outside. The warehouse sat in the industrial district of what used to be downtown Phoenix, surrounded by empty factories and abandoned office buildings. They had chosen this location because it offered multiple escape routes and was far enough from residential areas to avoid the largest concentrations of the infected. But as winter approached, the desert city's temperatures dropped dramatically at night, and their makeshift shelter provided little insulation against the cold. "The heating system stopped working yesterday," reported Jake Martinez, their engineer, as he climbed down from the ventilation shaft above. Oil stains covered his clothes and frustration etched lines across his young face. "The backup generator is running on fumes, and without it, we'll freeze before the infected get to us. I've been trying to jury-rig something, but we need proper parts, and those are in the hardware store 6 blocks from here." Dr. Patricia Wells, a former university professor who had proven invaluable in understanding the infected's behavior patterns, looked up from her notebook where she had been documenting their observations. "The horde outside has grown significantly larger over the past week. They seem to be drawn to areas with survivor activity, almost like they can sense us even when we're quiet. Yesterday's count showed at least 300 individuals within a 2-block radius." The group had learned to speak in hushed tones, understanding that even the slightest noise could attract unwanted attention. They had developed an elaborate system of hand signals and had padded their shoes with cloth to muffle footsteps. Every action was calculated, every movement deliberate. Rebecca Torres, barely 19 and one of the youngest survivors, sat hunched in the corner, clutching a photograph of her family. She had been a college student when the outbreak began, studying to become a teacher. Now she helped watch over the children in their group, including 8-year-old Lucy and her 6-year-old brother Sam, whose parents had been lost during the first week. "I keep thinking about my mom's cooking," Rebecca whispered, her voice barely audible. "She used to make this amazing chili that would warm you up from the inside. I'd give anything for a bowl of that right now, sitting around our old kitchen table, complaining about homework and wondering what movie to watch." The mention of food reminded everyone of their dwindling supplies. Their last major scavenging expedition had yielded only a few cans of vegetables and some stale crackers. The nearby stores had been picked clean weeks ago, either by other survivors or by the military units that had swept through the area before communications went dark. Michael Chong, their scout, had been monitoring radio frequencies, hoping to pick up any signs of organized rescue efforts or safe zones. The static-filled airwaves occasionally carried fragments of transmissions, but nothing concrete enough to risk abandoning their current shelter. "There was something earlier," he reported quietly. Sounded like military chatter, but it was too broken up to understand. Could have been automated or could have been from hundreds of miles away. As darkness settled over the city, the group huddled together for warmth, sharing thin blankets and taking turns keeping watch. Outside, the infected moved through the streets in their endless search for the living, their footsteps creating a constant rhythm that had become the soundtrack to their survival. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions about whether to stay hidden or risk everything for the supplies they desperately needed. Ana Rodriguez checked her weapon, a crowbar she had taken from the warehouse's maintenance room. Like everyone else, she had been forced to learn violence as a means of survival, something that went against every instinct she had developed during her 30 years as a kindergarten teacher. The transformation from educator to survivor had been brutal, but adaptation meant staying alive another day. The infected gathered outside seemed particularly active tonight, their movements more agitated than usual. Dr. Wells noted this behavior change with growing concern, wondering if something had disturbed them or if they were responding to stimuli the survivors couldn't detect. The uncertainty was perhaps the most terrifying aspect of their situation. never knowing what new horror each dawn might bring. David Park adjusted his position near the window, peering through a small gap in the boards they had used to seal the opening. The street below writhed with movement, dozens of figures shambling through the darkness, their lifeless eyes scanning for any sign of prey. He had been an accountant before the world ended, dealing with numbers and spreadsheets instead of life-and-death decisions. Now he helped calculate their resource consumption and plan supply runs with mathematical precision. The temperature continued to drop as the night wore on, and despite their efforts to conserve body heat, several group members began showing signs of hypothermia. Elena worked quietly to warm the children, using her own body heat and what remained of their medical hot packs. Every resource had become precious, every decision weighed against future survival. Marcus made his choice as the first hints of dawn appeared on the horizon. They couldn't wait any longer for rescue that might never come. The hardware store raid would happen today regardless of the risks. 6 blocks had never seemed so far, but staying meant certain death from cold and hunger. At least moving gave them a chance, however slim it might be. The warehouse that had sheltered them for weeks now felt like a trap, its walls closing in as their options dwindled. But somewhere in the city beyond their barricades, supplies waited that could extend their survival for precious additional days or weeks. The question wasn't whether they would face danger, but whether they could overcome it long enough to see another sunset. Marcus Rivera stood at the warehouse's main entrance, his hand resting on the steel bar that secured their primary barricade. Behind him, the remaining 11 survivors made final preparations for what could be their last coordinated effort. The plan was simple in concept but terrifying in execution. A small team would create a distraction on the warehouse's east side while the main group moved west toward the hardware store 6 blocks away. Remember, noise draws them, but sudden silence makes them suspicious, Dr. Wells reminded everyone as they checked their improvised weapons and gathered their meager supplies. Her observations of infected behavior had kept them alive this long, and her insights would be crucial for navigating the streets filled with hundreds of mindless predators. Jake Martinez had spent the early morning hours fashioning noisemakers from empty cans and metal scraps, creating devices that could be thrown to attract attention away from their actual route. These should give us maybe 10 to 15 minutes of distraction, he explained, demonstrating how the contraptions would clatter loudly when they hit the ground. After that, they'll start spreading out again, so we need to move fast. Elena Thompson prepared a medical kit with their remaining supplies, knowing that any injury during the mission could prove fatal without proper treatment. I'm coming with the main group, she announced, despite protests about her value as their only trained medic. If someone gets hurt out there, field treatment might be the difference between making it back and becoming one of them. The children would stay behind with Rebecca Torres and Michael Chong, hidden in the warehouse's most secure section with instructions to remain absolutely silent until the team returned. 8-year-old Lucy held her brother Sam close, understanding better than any child should that this might be goodbye forever. The hardware store has a loading dock in the back, David Park explained, referencing the hand-drawn map he had created from memory of the neighborhood's layout before the outbreak. If we can get inside through the rear entrance, we avoid the main street where most of the infected congregate during daylight hours. Ana Rodriguez gripped her crowbar tighter, her teacher's instincts warring with the survival skills she had been forced to develop. What if we get separated? She asked, voicing the fear everyone shared but few dared speak aloud. We don't, Marcus replied firmly. We stay together, we watch each other's backs, and we all come home. Anyone who falls behind gets carried. Anyone who gets overwhelmed gets backup. We're not losing anyone else. The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows through the warehouse's skylights. Outside, the infected seemed less active during daylight hours, but their numbers remained overwhelming. Dr. Wells estimated at least 400 individuals within a 6-block radius, with more arriving from outlying areas every day. They're drawn to cities, she had explained during one of their evening discussions. Something about urban environments attracts them, maybe the scent of previous human activity or just the higher concentration of potential prey. Rural areas might be safer, but getting there would mean crossing miles of open ground with no shelter. The team consisted of Marcus, Elena, Jake, Anna, David, and Dr. Wells, leaving 6 people to guard the warehouse and care for the children. It wasn't ideal splitting their already small group, but they needed enough people to carry back significant supplies while maintaining security at their base. Each member carried a backpack for hauling materials, along with their primary weapon and a backup knife. They had learned through bitter experience that infected could grab conventional weapons, so everyone kept a blade within easy reach as a last resort. Generator parts are priority 1, Jake reminded them. Without heat, we won't survive another week of these temperatures. After that, medical supplies, food, and anything we can use to reinforce our defenses. The hardware store they were targeting had been partially looted during the early days of the outbreak, but aerial reconnaissance from the warehouse's roof suggested significant supplies remained in the back sections. The risk was worth taking, especially since alternative locations were either too far away or completely overrun. Marcus checked his watch, noting the time at exactly 9:30 in the morning. Jake, get ready with the first distraction device. Everyone else, final equipment check. The ritual of preparation helped calm nerves and ensure nothing crucial was forgotten. Anna closed her eyes briefly, thinking of her former students and wondering if any of them had survived the chaos that consumed their world. Teaching children had required patience, creativity, and adaptability, skills that served her well in this new reality where every day brought unexpected challenges. David reviewed their route one final time, memorizing street names and identifying potential choke points where the infected might trap them. His analytical mind helped him spot problems others might miss, calculating risks and alternatives with the same precision he had once applied to financial projections. Dr. Wells made final notes in her observation journal, recording the infected's current behavior patterns and distribution around their warehouse. The information might prove valuable if other survivors found her notes, assuming anyone lived long enough to read them. Elena checked her medical supplies one last time, ensuring bandages, antiseptic, and pain medication were easily accessible. In the field, seconds could mean the difference between stopping bleeding and losing a team member to blood loss. The moment arrived with Jake positioning himself at the east window, distraction device in hand. "On my signal," Marcus whispered, his hand moving to the barricade release. The next few hours would determine whether their small group survived another day or joined the endless ranks of the infected wandering through the empty streets of their former home. The steel bar slid away from the warehouse door with barely a whisper, months of practice making the movement smooth and silent. Marcus peered through the narrow opening, scanning the immediate area for any infected that might have wandered close during the night. The street appeared clear, but appearances had proven deadly before. Jake's first distraction device sailed through the air, landing with a tremendous clatter against a dumpster 3 blocks east of their position. Almost immediately, dozens of infected heads turned toward the sound, their bodies following with the mechanical persistence that had made them so dangerous. The shambling figures began moving away from the warehouse, drawn by the promise of prey. "Now," Marcus whispered, pulling the door open just wide enough for single-file passage. Dr. Wells slipped through first, her slight frame making her ideal for reconnaissance. She moved with surprising grace for someone in her 60s, decades of hiking and outdoor research serving her well in this new environment. Elena followed, her medical bag secured tightly to prevent any rattling that might attract attention. Behind her came Anna, then David, and finally Jake, who sealed the door behind them with practiced efficiency. The warehouse faded into the background as they began their journey through streets that had once been familiar but now felt like alien territory. The first 2 blocks passed without incident, the team moving in careful formation with Dr. Wells leading and Marcus bringing up the rear. They stayed close to building walls, using shadows and overhangs to break up their silhouettes. Every doorway represented potential danger, every corner a place where infected might be lurking. "Movement ahead," Dr. Wells signaled, raising her closed fist to halt the group. A lone infected figure wandered through an intersection 50 yards ahead, its torn clothing and obvious injuries marking it as one of the early casualties from the outbreak's first days. The creature moved aimlessly, searching for stimuli that weren't there. Marcus made the decision quickly, pointing to a narrow alley that would allow them to bypass the intersection entirely. The detour added precious minutes to their journey, but confrontation with even a single infected could attract others through sound or scent. They had learned that the creatures possessed an uncanny ability to communicate threats to their kind. The alley reeked of garbage and decay, forcing the team to breathe through their mouths to avoid retching. Halfway through the narrow passage, Jake spotted something that made his blood run cold. Fresh human remains, no more than a day or 2 old. Someone else had tried to use this route recently and paid the ultimate price. "Keep moving," Marcus urged quietly, noting how the discovery affected everyone's morale. They couldn't afford to dwell on others' failures when their own survival hung in the balance. The hardware store grew closer with each step, but so did the accumulated stress of moving through hostile territory. Block 4 brought them to their most dangerous checkpoint, a wide intersection with no cover and excellent visibility in all directions. During normal times, the crossroads had been busy with traffic and pedestrians. Now it served as a gathering point for infected drawn by the echoes of activity from nearby buildings. Dr. Wells counted at least 20 creatures within the immediate area, with more visible in the distance. Their random movement patterns made timing crucial, waiting for gaps that might last only seconds. There, she pointed to a brief opening as several infected wandered toward a car alarm that had been triggered somewhere to the south. The team sprinted across the intersection in a tight group, their padded shoes making almost no sound on the cracked asphalt. David stumbled slightly on loose debris but recovered quickly, Elena grabbing his arm to steady him. They reached the far side just as new infected began filtering into the area, drawn by some distant disturbance. 2 blocks left, Anna whispered, consulting David's hand-drawn map. The hardware store's distinctive red roof was visible now, rising above the surrounding buildings like a beacon of hope. But between them and their destination lay the most challenging obstacle yet, a section of street where a partial building collapse had created a narrow bottleneck. The collapsed structure forced all movement through a channel barely wide enough for 2 people, with infected potentially lurking in the rubble on either side. Jake examined the debris field, noting how the concrete chunks and twisted metal created perfect hiding spots for ambush predators. We go through fast and together, Marcus decided. No stopping, no looking back. If something jumps out, we deal with it as a group and keep moving. The strategy was risky but necessary, as alternative routes would add miles to their journey and exhaust their energy reserves. Elena led this time, her medical training making her naturally cautious about potential hazards. She spotted the danger first, movement among the rubble that wasn't caused by wind or settling debris. "We're not alone," she signaled, indicating the area where she had detected activity. The infected emerged from concealment with frightening coordination, for creatures that had been perfectly camouflaged among the concrete chunks. Their appearance suggested they had been trapped during the building's collapse but somehow survived to become ambush hunters, adapted to their environment in ways Dr. Wells had never documented. Anna's crowbar connected with the first attacker's skull before it could grab Elena, the impact sending the creature sprawling backward into the rubble. David and Jake flanked the second infected, their combined assault bringing it down before it could sound an alarm. The remaining 2 creatures pressed forward with relentless determination. Dr. Wells surprised everyone by producing a heavy geology hammer from her pack, bringing it down on one infected spine with enough force to sever the connection between brain and body. Marcus handled the final threat with his machete, a weapon he had taken from a sporting goods store during their early scavenging expeditions. The entire encounter lasted less than 30 seconds, but the noise of combat echoed through the surrounding streets. In the distance, answering calls from other infected suggested their presence had been detected. "Move now," Marcus commanded, abandoning stealth for speed as they rushed through the remaining section of debris. The hardware store's loading dock appeared around the final corner, its metal door slightly ajar from previous looters. But between the team and their destination, attracted by the sounds of their recent fight, a new group of infected emerged from the surrounding buildings. At least a dozen creatures, with more appearing every moment as the commotion spread through the area like ripples in a pond. Jake Martinez reached the hardware store's loading dock first, his engineering background making him naturally suited for evaluating the building's structural integrity and access points. The metal door hung partially open on damaged hinges, creating a gap just wide enough for human passage but too narrow for multiple infected to enter simultaneously. "The frame is solid," he reported quickly, examining the doorway for potential collapse risks. "Looks like whoever was here before forced it open but didn't damage the security features. We can get inside and secure it behind us." Dr. Wells kept watch while the others squeezed through the opening one by one, her hammer still gripped tightly from their previous encounter. The approaching infected were close enough now that individual faces became visible, each one a former person with their own story, now reduced to mindless hunger and aggression. Anna inside now," Marcus commanded, his voice tight with urgency. The 2 women slipped through the gap while Jake worked to assess how quickly they could seal the entrance once everyone was through. The loading dock's interior was dark and cluttered, but it represented safety from the growing threat outside. David hesitated at the threshold, looking back at the approaching horde with analytical precision. 37 individuals visible, with more arriving from side streets. "They're moving faster than usual, possibly because they detected the scent of our recent kills." His observations were cut short as Marcus physically pushed him through the doorway. The hardware store's interior was a maze of tall shelving units, overturned displays and scattered merchandise. Emergency lighting provided dim illumination, suggesting the building's backup power system was still functional. The air smelled of dust, metal, and something else, something organic that made everyone unconsciously hold their breath. "We're not the first ones here," Anna observed, pointing to obvious signs of previous human presence. Empty food containers, makeshift bedding, and personal items scattered throughout the loading area. "Question is, are they still here and are they friendly or hostile?" Jake immediately began searching for the electrical panel and generator components they desperately needed, while Elena set up a temporary medical station near the entrance in case anyone had been injured during their dash to safety. The sounds of infected gathering outside grew louder, claws and fists pounding against the metal door. "The loading dock door won't hold forever," Dr. Wells warned, examining the damaged hinges and noting stress points where repeated impacts might cause failure. "We need to find what we came for and identify an alternative exit route before they break through or find another way inside." Marcus took point, leading the group deeper into the store's interior. The main retail area had been heavily looted, with empty shelves and overturned displays creating an obstacle course. But the back sections, where contractors typically purchased bulk supplies, appeared largely untouched by previous scavengers. "Generator parts, Section 12, David read from a partially destroyed store directory. "Medical supplies would be in the first aid section, but that's probably been cleaned out already. Food and water dispensers are near the front, but that puts us too close to the main entrances." The sound of breaking glass echoed through the building, followed by the distinctive moan of infected that had found another way inside. The front windows, Jake realized with growing alarm. The security glass must have finally given way under pressure. "We've got company coming from multiple directions now." Elena grabbed what medical supplies she could find from a small first aid display, stuffing bandages and antiseptic into her pack. "Not much here but better than nothing. We need to move fast before we get trapped between the front and back groups." Anna discovered a cache of hand tools that could serve as weapons, distributing crowbars and hammers to anyone who needed better armament. "The employee break room might have food supplies," she suggested, pointing toward a door marked, "Staff only" near the back of the store. Dr. Wells documented the infected's behavior as they searched the building, noting how they seemed to coordinate their approach despite having no obvious means of communication. "They're learning," she murmured, making quick notes in her journal. "Adapting their hunting strategies based on previous encounters with survivors." The generator section yielded exactly what Jake needed: replacement parts, electrical components, and enough fuel to keep their warehouse heating system running for at least another month. "This is it," he announced triumphantly, stuffing critical components into his pack. "We can fix everything with these parts." Marcus found the store's security office, hoping to access surveillance cameras that might show them the safest exit route. The monitors displayed multiple angles of the building's exterior, revealing the full scope of their predicament. Infected surrounded the hardware store completely, with more arriving every minute. "The roof," David suggested, studying the building's layout. "Most of these stores have roof access for maintenance. If we can get up there, we might be able to move to an adjacent building and come down somewhere with fewer infected." The sound of the loading dock door finally giving way reached them as a tremendous crash, followed immediately by the shuffle and moan of infected pouring into the building. "Time's up," Marcus announced. "Everyone to the roof access now." Elena led the way up a narrow maintenance stairway, her medical bag bouncing against her back as they climbed toward what they hoped would be salvation. Behind them, the sounds of infected exploration grew louder as the creatures spread throughout the store, following scent trails and searching for their prey. Jake paused at a utility panel, quickly shutting off the building's emergency lighting to make their pursuit more difficult. "That might buy us a few extra minutes," he explained, following the others up the stairs in near total darkness. The roof access door was locked, but Anna's crowbar made quick work of the mechanism. Desert sunlight flooded the stairway as the door swung open, temporarily blinding everyone who had adapted to the store's dim interior. The hardware store's roof was flat and featureless except for HVAC equipment and a few maintenance hatches. There, Dr. Wells pointed to an adjacent office building whose roof was only 8 feet away and 2 feet lower than their current position. "We can jump across, but it'll have to be fast and accurate. No second chances if someone misses." The infected had found the stairway, their moans echoing up the narrow shaft as they began their relentless climb toward the roof. Marcus made the jump first, landing heavily but safely on the office building's roof. He immediately positioned himself to catch anyone who might stumble during their landing. Elena went next, her lighter weight making the jump easier but her medical bag throwing off her balance. Marcus caught her arm as she landed, preventing a potentially dangerous fall. One by one, the team made the crossing while the sounds of pursuit grew closer behind them. Anna was the last to jump, turning back briefly to see the first infected emerging onto the hardware store's roof. The creature moved with mechanical determination, showing no fear of heights or understanding of danger. It stepped directly off the edge, plummeting to the alley below with a sickening impact. The office building's roof access was secured with a heavy lock, but Jake's newly acquired tools from the hardware store made quick work of the barrier. They descended into an empty office space, its cubicles and conference rooms eerily preserved from the day the outbreak began. Personal photos and coffee cups sat exactly where they had been abandoned months ago. Fire escape on the east side, David identified, consulting his mental map of the neighborhood. It should put us 3 blocks closer to the warehouse and away from the main concentration of infected. The plan seemed sound, but they all knew that survival often came down to luck as much as planning. Elena treated a minor cut on Jake's hand that he had sustained while forcing the roof access door, using precious antiseptic from their dwindling medical supplies. "We're doing well so far," she encouraged, though exhaustion was visible on everyone's faces. "Just need to make it home with what we've found." Dr. Wells observed the infected below through an office window, noting how they had begun to disperse now that the immediate stimulus was gone. "They don't maintain focus without active prey," she documented. "This suggests limited memory retention, which could be useful for future planning." Marcus checked his watch, realizing they had been away from the warehouse for over 3 hours. The others would be worried, and their fuel supplies were burning while the heating system continued to operate. "Time to head home," he announced, gathering everyone for the next phase of their dangerous journey. The fire escape proved to be in good condition, allowing them to descend to street level without alerting nearby infected. But as they prepared for the return journey, Marcus realized their greatest challenge still lay ahead: reaching the warehouse while carrying heavy loads of supplies and dealing with fatigue that made mistakes more likely. Anna took one last look at the hardware store, now crawling with infected who continued searching for traces of their presence. "We got what we came for," she said quietly. "Now we just have to survive long enough to use it." The return journey began with careful navigation through side streets, avoiding the main roads where infected traffic remained heavy. Jake's pack bulged with generator parts, while Elena carried medical supplies that could extend their survival for weeks. Each step brought them closer to the safety of their warehouse, but also deeper into territory where a single mistake could prove fatal. The return journey through Phoenix's abandoned streets required different tactics than their outbound trip. Loaded with critical supplies and exhausted from hours of tension, the team moved more slowly and needed frequent rest stops to avoid collapse from fatigue. Marcus adjusted their route to favor concealment over speed, choosing longer paths that offered better cover. "The infected patterns have shifted," Dr. Wells observed as they paused in an empty storefront doorway. During their absence, the creatures had migrated toward areas where their morning distraction had drawn them, creating new danger zones while clearing others they had previously avoided. Elena struggled with her medical supply pack, the additional weight throwing off her balance after hours of careful movement. Anna quietly redistributed some items to her own pack, understanding that team survival depended on everyone maintaining their mobility and effectiveness. Jake's generator parts represented their most critical cargo, the components that would restore heat to their warehouse and potentially extend their survival through the coming winter. He had wrapped each piece carefully to prevent rattling, but the bulk made him less agile when quick movement was required. "2 infected, northwest corner," David signaled, spotting movement near what had been their planned route. The creatures appeared to be feeding on something, their attention focused downward in a way that suggested recent prey. The team would need to find an alternative path or wait for the creatures to move on. Marcus made the tactical decision to backtrack 3 blocks and approach their warehouse from the south, adding 20 minutes to their journey but avoiding the feeding infected. The detour took them through residential areas where abandoned homes created multiple hiding spots but also more potential ambush points. The afternoon sun climbed higher, and despite the desert's winter temperatures, physical exertion in heavy clothing began taking its toll. Elena monitored everyone for signs of heat exhaustion or dehydration, knowing that either condition could prove fatal in their current circumstances. "Movement in the house ahead," Anna warned, pointing to a 2-story residence where curtains had shifted in an upstairs window. The team froze, unsure whether they were seeing infected, survivors or just wind-blown fabric. In their world, assumption could be deadly either way. A face appeared briefly in the window, definitely human and very much alive. The person seemed to be signaling them, pointing toward the back of the house and making gestures that might indicate safety. But Marcus had learned to be suspicious of strangers, knowing that desperation could make anyone dangerous. "We stick to our route," he decided after a brief internal debate. Their warehouse was less than 2 miles away, and unknown survivors represented too many variables. The person in the house would have to fend for themselves, just as Marcus's team had learned to do. Dr. Wells documented the sighting in her journal, noting the location and apparent condition of the unknown survivor. If they survived long enough to establish a larger community, such information might prove valuable for rescue or recruitment efforts. The final mile proved to be the most challenging, as infected drawn by their morning activities had begun returning to the warehouse district. The team found themselves moving through increasingly dense concentrations of creatures, requiring extreme caution and perfect timing. Jake's distraction devices, Elena reminded them, pointing to the remaining noisemakers he had crafted. One more diversion might clear our path long enough to reach the warehouse safely. The strategy had worked once, but using it again carried the risk of attracting even more infected to their area. Marcus weighed the options quickly, knowing that delay increased their chances of being discovered while action might bring temporary safety at the cost of long-term security. Do it, he decided, pointing to an area 50 yards from their warehouse entrance. We'll have maybe 10 minutes before they start spreading out again. Jake's device sailed through the air with practiced accuracy, landing among a cluster of overturned vehicles with a tremendous crash. The noise drew infected from multiple directions, creating a temporary clear zone around their warehouse entrance. The team sprinted the final distance with everything they had left. Rebecca Torres heard them coming and had the warehouse door ready, sliding it open just wide enough for rapid entry. One by one, the team members dove through the opening, gasping with relief as they found themselves back in familiar territory. The door sealed behind them with a reassuring clang. "Thank God you're back," Michael Chang greeted them, his relief obvious. "We were starting to think something had gone wrong." The radio picked up some chatter about increased infected activity in your area. The children rushed forward to embrace the returning adults, their faces showing the strain of hours spent wondering if they had been orphaned again. Elena immediately began distributing medical supplies, while Jake headed straight for the generator room with his precious cargo of replacement parts. "Give me 2 hours," he promised, already laying out tools and components. "We'll have heat again before sunset." Dr. Wells updated her behavioral notes, recording how the infected had responded to their warehouse infiltration and the effectiveness of their distraction tactics. The information might save lives during future supply runs, assuming they survived long enough to need them. Anna helped prepare a meal from their remaining food supplies, celebrating their successful mission while rationing portions to extend their stores. The taste of warm soup felt like luxury after hours of tension and fear in the cold streets. David calculated their improved survival odds based on the supplies they had recovered, factoring in heating fuel, medical materials, and potential tool applications. "This mission bought us at least another month," he announced, though everyone understood that a month might not be enough for rescue to arrive. Marcus stood watch as the others rested, studying the infected patterns outside their warehouse and planning for their next supply run. They had proven they could venture out and return safely, but each mission carried cumulative risks that would eventually catch up with them. "We need to start thinking about a permanent solution," he told Dr. Wells quietly. "These supply runs are keeping us alive, but they're not sustainable long-term. Eventually, our luck is going to run out, and we need to be ready with alternatives." The sound of Jake's work echoed through the warehouse as he installed the new generator components, each successful connection bringing them closer to restored heating. Outside, the infected continued their endless patrol, unaware that their prey had successfully evaded them once again. As evening approached and the first warm air began circulating through their shelter, the team allowed themselves a moment of quiet satisfaction. They had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious, proving that careful planning and mutual support could overcome even the most desperate circumstances. But tomorrow would bring new challenges, and their fight for survival was far from over. The gentle hum of the restored heating system provided the first comfort the survivors had experienced in days, warm air gradually replacing the bone-chilling cold that had threatened to claim them all. Jake emerged from the generator room covered in grease but grinning triumphantly, having successfully installed the hardware store components that would keep them alive through the approaching winter. "Temperature should reach livable levels within the hour," he announced, wiping his hands on an oily rag. The relief on everyone's faces was unmistakable, children and adults alike beginning to shed the extra layers they had been wearing constantly since the heating failed. Elena organized their newly acquired medical supplies, creating an inventory that would help them prepare for future injuries and illnesses. The antiseptic, bandages, and pain medication they had recovered represented weeks of additional survival capability, assuming they could avoid major injuries. Dr. Wells continued her behavioral observations, noting how the infected outside their warehouse had settled into new patrol patterns following the day's disturbances. They seem to establish territories, she documented. Areas they defend from other infected while searching for prey. Understanding these boundaries might help us plan safer routes. The evening meal felt like a celebration despite their meager rations, everyone understanding how close they had come to freezing to death in their sleep. Rebecca served portions of their remaining soup while the children shared stories about the games they had played to stay warm during the adults' absence. "What's our next priority?" Anna asked during their informal planning meeting. The successful hardware store mission had boosted morale, but everyone understood that their survival remained precarious. Food stores would last perhaps another 2 weeks, and winter weather was intensifying. Marcus spread David's hand-drawn map on a makeshift table, marking locations they had successfully raided and identifying potential targets for future supply runs. The medical center 8 blocks north might have pharmaceuticals and surgical supplies. There's also a grocery distribution center about 2 miles east, but that's probably heavily defended or completely picked clean. Distance increases risk exponentially, David calculated, his analytical mind working through probability equations. Each additional block we travel multiplies our exposure to infected, reduces our escape options and stretches our physical capabilities. We need to balance potential rewards against realistic survival odds. Michael Chung reported on radio communications he had monitored throughout the day, most of which consisted of automated emergency broadcasts or military frequencies with no apparent activity. There was something different this afternoon, he mentioned. Sounded like civilian chatter, maybe other survivor groups, but the signal was too weak to establish contact. The possibility of other survivors sparked immediate interest and debate among the group. Contact with additional people could mean resource sharing, increased security and emotional support. But it could also mean